right, let's go ahead and get started. Again, this is Bonnie McFarland, and welcome to today's State and Federal Programs Directors meeting for November. Hard to believe it's November already. Welcome and congratulations on getting through this year so far. I'm joined today by our team members, Rachel Garcia, Adrian Balcazar, Evan Bartelheim, Jeannie Keith, and Amy Tomamatsu, and you'll be hearing from each of them today as we move through our agenda. So let's take a look at what that agenda is. And here are the topics that we're going to be taking a look at today. First of all, I'm going to spend some time looking at the district role in school plan development and monitoring school plans. We just recently been reviewing comprehensive support and improvement prompts for districts, and it's gave us some cause to think about what the district role is, not only for those schools, but for all schools. So we'll be taking a look at that. As usual, we'll have an FPM update, and we'll be looking at one of the new instruments that's going to be that is part of the review currently. We're going to take a look next at some consolidated application reporting for the winter, just an update and a preview of some things you can get started looking at and some reminders. We did an workshop just last week on the budget overview for parents, and so we're just going to do just a brief recap of that and some reminders and information about the budget overview, which is coming due in just a few weeks. We will also have an update. There's been some new information on your free and reduced data collection, free and reduced meal data collection, so we'll update you on that. And then we have a bit of a possible preview of the annual update that will be coming out. It'll go to the board in January, but we'll be due in June. Whoops. And could you make sure you're muted? Don't get everyone's dogs, just the one who's speaking. And then we'll take a look at the CARES Act and some updates. We have some spending timelines that are coming due. Okay. All right, so as usual, if you would put your questions in the chat, we'll answer any of them that we can. This group tends to ask tough questions, so we like to have some time to look at those and get you the correct answer. We'll send out a Q&A subsequent to this meeting. All right. Okay, so before we go ahead, we just wanted to give you an update on one recent activity, and that has to do with communication that went out to most districts and charter schools just recently. And it had to do with the notification that the State Board of Education had approved your LCAP federal addendum at the September board meeting. Some of you may have forgotten, that's been almost a year ago that you put those in, but the board did approve most of those for most districts, so you were notified of that, and your district should have gotten a letter. If you don't have a copy of that, I'd check with your superintendent. They went to district superintendents. But included in that were some reminders and one new piece of information. We just wanted to mention, and we'll be talking more about it next month, but the notice included a reminder that LEAs must periodically review and revise their addendum as needed. So that's just a reminder that you submit your addendum once for each authorization to CDE. However, after that, it should annually be updated at the local level to reflect what's going on with your programs in the current year. And given that this year is very different than most years, most districts will have some revisions to make to their addendum. So it should be updated, but that's a local process, and you have that on file, and that should be available for program monitoring. There was also another piece of information in there indicating that LEAs are required to update in the Title I section of the addendum. And you may recall there was a section on educator equity, and you probably recall it because it was a challenging section at the time. It had to do with the update is required because the California made changes to the definition of ineffective and out-of-field teachers. And so the addendum needs to be updated to align with those new definitions. The requirement in the addendum addresses the legal requirement that low-income and minority students are not taught at higher levels by such teachers than other students. And to do that, you were required to do an analysis and provide that analysis to the department. We're going to talk more about that next month and what that entails, but we just wanted to give you a heads up. That's what that's about. Again, that won't be resubmitted. It's a local activity, local requirement that would be approved by your local board. There was also a reminder in there about a new requirement. Senate Bill 820 does require the posting of the addendum on your district website. As you may recall, that's been an issue that's been in question for some time, whether it needed to be posted or not, whether certain sections needed to be posted. It's now been clarified in SB 820 that you do need to post the full LCAP federal addendum on your website. So that's just a few reminders. Again, next month we'll spend some more time on what that update's going to look like. So now I'm going to turn over to Rachel and going to take a look at the district role in school planning. Rachel?
Thank you, Bonnie. Good morning, everyone. So as Bonnie mentioned, in this section, we'll be taking a look at the district role in the school plan process. Next slide, please. So just as a reminder, there's no specific deadline or timeline in statute for the development or approval of the school plan. This is a local decision based on the needs of the school and the district. It's important to note that although there's no specific deadline, schools must have an approved plan to expend funds. For CSI and ATSI schools, the CDE's expectation is that plans are developed and approved no later than November so that implementation can begin in December 2020. During non-COVID times, the CDE's expectation is that CSI and ATSI plans are fully developed and approved by the first day of the school year so that implementation can begin at the start of the school year. Next slide, please. So even though the school site council is the main body responsible for the development of the school plan, districts play a critical role in supporting this process. And so the district is responsible for providing training, technical assistance, and the oversight of the school plan process. On this slide, there's a screenshot of a LACO resource document that highlights some of the key areas of district responsibilities related to school plans. For the purpose of this meeting, we're going to focus on two sections of this document, but we will post a copy of the full document with the materials on our LACO SFP webpage. The first section is school site councils and advisory committees, and districts play an important role in ensuring that school site councils and advisory committees such as the ELAC are able to effectively fulfill their legal responsibilities related to school plans. So this includes training school site councils in their roles and responsibilities, school plan requirements, and requirements for consulting with advisory committees. Also providing technical assistance and support to school site councils in analyzing data, as well as training advisory committees on their roles and responsibilities for providing input in the development of the school plan. And it's up to the district to determine the process for providing this training and support to school site councils. So some districts provide training directly to school site councils and advisory committees, whereas others provide training and support to site principals to carry out this work. Next slide, please. Districts also have a responsibility for supporting schools with the SIPSA planning process by providing tools, training, and support in conducting a comprehensive needs assessment, providing training and support to schools in identifying resource inequities, also training site administrators on facilitating the analysis of data with stakeholders, and providing training and support on evidence-based interventions. Districts should also be reviewing the proposed actions and strategies included in school plans to ensure that those actions and strategies are ones that are most likely to impact student achievement. Next slide, please. So as mentioned in the previous slide, Districts are responsible for supporting schools with the comprehensive needs assessment process. And this support should include ensuring that schools understand what the comprehensive needs assessment is and its purpose, and also training site administrators on how to conduct a comprehensive needs assessment. This is an area that we'd like to take a deeper look at, as schools may need more support with this process now more than ever. So what is a comprehensive needs assessment? And this is a question that we field frequently, often followed by the question, do you have a template that we can follow? At its most basic, a comprehensive needs assessment is a process or procedure that is used to identify and address factors between current outcomes and desired outcomes. And this process must include steps to provide clarity about the current situation and then identify what is needed to attain the desired student outcomes. The goal of the needs assessment is to help educators identify, understand, and prioritize the needs that districts or schools must address to improve student outcomes. It's important to note that the findings yielded through a comprehensive needs assessment are only accurate as long as the LEA or school context remains the same. And given the current situation with the pandemic, school closures, and distance learning, it's very likely that student needs have greatly increased and are drastically different when compared to this time last year. And so the current context really stresses the importance of conducting a comprehensive needs assessment. Next slide, please. A needs assessment for improvement is a systemic process to identify the strengths and weaknesses within the context and constraints of the school and dig deeper into root causes. Identifying areas of weakness is an essential first step toward identifying and addressing the root causes of low performance. Root cause analysis is an important part of the needs assessment process because it addresses the problem rather than the symptoms of the problem. And the needs assessment process, it leads to the development of a plan to improve student outcomes. Next slide, please. So it's important to note that a needs assessment for improvement is not an isolated tool. Essentially, it's the first step in the continuous improvement cycle. And this includes understanding root causes that contribute to the prioritized needs, selecting evidence-based interventions that address those needs, preparing for and implementing selected strategies and interventions, and then evaluating whether or not those strategies are addressing the needs and achieving the desired outcomes. The needs assessment is really the foundation for the school plan. All strategies and actions should be informed by and aligned with the data. Implementing a successful needs assessment leads to aligned acts of school improvement rather than random acts. Next slide, please. So this slide highlights the actionable steps of a comprehensive needs assessment process. And so this includes identifying relevant stakeholders by establishing a school planning team, analyzing data, which includes collecting various forms of data and organizing it in a way that is understandable and useful for stakeholders, examining data to draw conclusions, identify trends, and begin to identify and prioritize needs. Also reviewing the current school plan and the effectiveness of actions and strategies in the current plan. Then comparing the findings from the evaluation of the current plan to the findings from the analysis of current data. Also reviewing district goals and priorities, as well as other site goals and priorities. Then developing specific goals that address the prioritized needs identified in the previous steps, and identifying measurable outcomes. All of these steps lead to the final step of writing the school plan. Next slide, please. We've received several questions from LEAs about what data schools should consider using for the needs assessment and school plans in the absence of 2020 CASP results. And so some of the data schools could consider using include data from the 2019 dashboard, graduation and dropout data for 2019-20, and this is collected in CALPADS. Suspension and chronic absenteeism data, also collected in CALPADS for the 19-20 school year. Also, any local data sources, such as assessments identified for learning loss in the Learning Continuity Plan, or qualitative data from surveys, and any LEA level data to evaluate resource inequities. In addition, the Alternative Data Sources Matrix is a resource that was developed by our colleagues at the San Diego County Office of Education. And we've included a screenshot at the bottom of the slide, and we'll be posting this resource with the materials from today's meeting. So this is a tool that was developed primarily to support districts and schools in identifying, collecting, and monitoring data points to provide critical information regarding the transition to and the implementation of distance and hybrid learning in their local context. And so the metrics focus on a couple of different areas, such as support for family and student well-being, access to distance learning, engagement in learning, access to social emotional learning and support, as well as communication structures and processes. Next slide, please. So there is not just one correct way to conduct a comprehensive needs assessment. And so one resource that highlights a needs assessment process is the State Support Network Needs Assessment Guidebook, produced by the American Institute for Research under the U.S. Department of Ed. And this guidebook supports the development and facilitation of a needs assessment process and lays out 5 phases of the needs assessment process. And this includes planning, collecting and organizing data, interpreting information, determining priorities, and finally connecting to implementation. The guidebook also provides guiding questions and key considerations for each phase of the needs assessment process. And we've included the link to the guidebook at the bottom of the slide, and we'll also be posting it with our materials. Next slide, please. This next resource is a tool that we created to summarize the needs assessment process and findings. Per the Code of Federal Regulations, schools operating a Title I school-wide program must document how the needs assessment was conducted, the results it obtained, and the conclusions it drew from those results. So this tool would serve that purpose by summarizing who was involved in the process and how, identifying the data that was reviewed, the results of the data, the conclusions drawn, as well as the prioritized needs and the potential root causes of those needs. Some districts require schools to include a summary of the needs assessment process and the findings within the school plan. Schools must document the process and findings, whether it's included in the school plan or in a separate document. Next slide, please. The last resource that I'd like to share is a new CDE webpage that provides a crosswalk of LCFF and Title I planning requirements for the 2021 school year. And this webpage provides an overview of the many required planning documents for this school year, including the budget overview for parents, school plans, CSI and ATSI plans, and various other documents. The link to the webpage is also included at the bottom of the slide. And that concludes my section. I will now turn it over to Adrienne for some FPM updates.
Good morning, everyone. Okay, you can hear me. So FPM is still happening, and so today we're going to look at an update. So the CDE has informed us that the September 2020 to June 2021 FPM reviews will be all done through telemonitoring format. So whether you were selected for an online or on-site review, it will be done through this format. And so it's really important if you are selected for the December through June FPMs that you contact your CDE FPM lead and establish that communication, because it is important in knowing what is what is part of this telemonitoring review. It is different than the past. So if in the past, if you had an online review, it was strictly online, and now with telemonitoring, there is that added component of interviews of various parent groups and teachers and such. So you want to be able to schedule those activities with your CDE FPM lead, as well as contact the specific programs, and so they know what specific activities are going to be taking place during your review. And then you can also schedule those interviews for all the various councils and teacher groups. And then also too, we want to remind you that your CDE FPM lead is the one that you reach out to when you have questions, you have concerns, or you want some consideration. So again, that communication, we can't impress enough on how much that is important and needs to happen. And that will ensure a very smooth FPM review. For the December, we have CDE informed us that they will be conducting their FPM virtual training just like the July one. This one is to inform moving forward any changes, as well as just restating what was shared in July. It will be held virtually on December 8th, 9th, 10th, and 11th, and they let us know that information will be being sent out soon. So with the Zoom links and the schedule of the sessions. So we're going to take a deeper look at the comprehensive support and improvement, as Rachel had explained about the various process and components of the school plan. We know that some schools have been identified for comprehensive support and improvement, which is, I'm going to say, CSI. And so CSI, the ESSA rules and regulations and requirements allow the school plan to meet the requirements of a CSI plan. As you will see, much of what is happening in the school plan, it kind of overlaps with the CSI plan requirements. And so it does need to be informed by state indicators. It is based on school level needs assessment, evidence-based interventions, and identifying resource inequities. So those components, as Rachel had expressed, is definitely part of your school plan process. But now, how is it different if your school has been identified as CSI, and how we're going to take a deeper look at that. So looking at the past, we know in ESSA, this table shows how the district supported the CSI schools with the development of the school plan. And you see that the district is shifting. In NCLB, it was the sanction-based, and now with the ESSA, it is support-based. And so you can see how that has shifted. However, I want to point out that the district responsibility for the lowest performing school has not changed. Whether it's NCLB to ESSA, that still is a district's responsibility. So we wanted to make sure that everyone that has that clear understanding that the district is solely responsible for assisting the CSI school and helping them. Here's another table that you can show how the district supports the CSI school with the development of the CSI plan. And so you can see how this part of prompt 2 of the LEA CSI prompts that were submitted to us October 30th, in the first column, you see how it's linked, and it's directly supporting the schools with the needs assessment, the evidence-based interventions, and the identification of resource inequities in the second column here. So you can see how the right side shows, this is the school plan, the CSI plan that the school is developing. And on the left, you see the CSI prompt that addresses how the district is supporting the school site in the development of their CSI plan. As stated, if those of you that submitted had CSI schools identified, your prompts were due to county offices by October 30th. And for those of you that received an email from us with various components, either not met, you would have seen something similar to this that addresses the CSI prompts. Just so you know, we do have to have an approved plan, CSI prompt, and we have to let CDE know that by December 1st, whether your CSI prompts are approved or not. So we want to make sure that you have plenty of time to revise them and get them back to us if you have received feedback from us about any part of the prompts not being fully described. So here you can take a look at the table that looks at the school identification, looks at the support that the LEA has done for the CSI school and the development of the CSI plan. And then lastly, I wanted to note the monitoring and evaluating effectiveness. So this is something that not only the school naturally does in their school plan process, but more so with the CSI school that's been identified, the district really needs to take I guess more of a firmer hand in terms of monitoring it and evaluating the implementation of the CSI plan and the actions and services, but also the effectiveness, because moving forward, you want to make sure that there are modifications that need to be done in the CSI plan, or perhaps there are certain things that the LEA can do to make sure that the implementation and the effectiveness of the actions and services, get the results that are being wanted. So, as Bonnie had mentioned, there is a new CSI instrument, and I'm hoping that all of you here, whether you are being reviewed or not, have had an opportunity to take a closer look at the requirements that are stated in this SSI plan. And so it really is talking about not only the comprehensive support and improvement of CSI schools, but it also is talking about ATSI and PSI schools as well. So this instrument is entitled School Support and Improvement, SSI, to make sure that it captures all of those areas. So it has 6 items, and so we're going to take a closer look at the items. So starting with SSI number 1, this focuses on the school site activities. So the middle column here in these next few slides, the middle column here, the table shows the CSI requirements, and the third shows the actual evidence that must be on hand for all LEAs and charters, and what documents must be collected during an SPM review. So in item 1, there are 3 required documentation. You must collect evidence that shows that the LEA notified the school that was identified for TSI and ATSI. Secondly, the actual school improvement plan, which is going to be synonymous with your school plan, our SFPSA, with the necessary components, as I mentioned in the earlier slides, as your stakeholder records, such as the agendas, minutes, and the sign-in sheets, showing how the stakeholders participated in the development of the CSI plan. Item 2 focuses on the allocation and reporting of the CSI funds. So if you did take the CSI funds, you're going to need to have the general ledger from the LEA and also showing the CSI school any leveled information that is needed with the inclusion on this ledger with the date, the description, the vendor name, and the total amount for each expenditure. Item number 3 is focused on the allowable use of CSI funds. So the CSI funds must be used for expenditures that are reasonable, necessary, and allocable. There are 5 required documentations. The first one, again, the general ledger for the CSI, the funds that's needed here again. Also, the position control report of any employees that are being paid with CSI funds. And so then with that comes the duty statements, any time and effort records, and also, again, the school improvement plan to show the alignment of how these funds are in alignment with the plan. Number 4, the fourth item here, item 4 is supplement, not supplant with school improvement funds. So this is focusing on the supplement, not supplant rule. You will need to have a narrative and or a table that explains the methodology used for allocating state and local funds to the school. You will also need to provide a sample that shows how your method was applied. The next item, item 5, focuses on the administrative charges and the allowable charges for salary and wages used with the CSI funds. So the documentation needs here are for items that would include your policies and procedures on time and effort. Again, your position control report indicating the employees, duty statements, and the time and effort records. So this is more towards the people. The last item that we have is item 6, and this is, I'm sure many of you are familiar with, it's the equipment inventory. And so this basically is the same as any equipment inventory that you have purchased or equipment that you've purchased with federal funds. So anything that is over $5,000 needs to go through CDE. You need permission from CDE to purchase as well as to dispose of any equipment that is over $5,000. Then you also need to have your equipment inventory records. And so this typically is your 3 main components of documentation. You first have your historical list of any item that is equipment that is over $500. Second, you need to have a record of your physical check within the 2-year period using CSI funds along with your other federal money. You also need to have this requirement completed. And the third is showing record of reconciliation between your physical check and your historical list. So there has to be that third component of a reconciliation showing that you know, you're doing something with the historical list and the physical check and showing that reconciliation. So we wanted everyone to be aware of this new instrument in order to include this in your process and your systems that you do have in place. So with that, I now will turn it over to Bonnie, who will speak about preparing for the CONAP reporting.
Thank you, Adrienne. Well, it's hard to believe, but it's getting around close to that time for the winter consolidated application submission. It's not going to be for a couple months, but we wanted to give you a heads up on some of the reporting requirements, some reminders about it. The submission is not open yet, so we don't have all the exact forms, but we have a good idea from the past of what will be required and want to give you some heads up. We also wanted to just give you a reminder that the winter CONAP submission is where you report on actions you've taken throughout the year. So sometimes LEAs wait until the winter submission to begin implementing these actions. They read the application and they say, oh gosh, we need to do this. This should not be when you start doing things. This is a reporting of what you've already done. Many of the requirements for reporting also have related actions that need to take place throughout the year to meet program requirements. So we wanted to review a few of those today. First of all, to start with, just some reminders, the anticipated release date is January 15th. That's generally when the process opens. We haven't had any notification that there will be a change in that or a change in the submission date, which is February 28th. LACO will be providing a workshop sometime in early February regarding, we always do a page-by-page walkthrough of the submission, so we'll be doing that later. The winter submission includes reporting on current year program funds, but it also includes expenditure reports going back to 2018-19. So there's a lot of fiscal reporting. Again, what's reported in the submission should reflect decisions that you made earlier in the year. Now's not the time to be making the decisions. These decisions should be made earlier. What you can do now to be prepared is to sign up in the CONAP listserv. That's how they will notify you as soon as the system is open. Go to the CDE website, look in under Consolidated Application, and that's where you'll find the listserv. Determine who has the information that's needed to complete the reports. Make sure you know who it is, you've connected with them, and they have the data available. And then ensure that all related requirements are being implemented that address the programs. All right, so let's start with the first one, which is federal transferability. Federal transferability allows you to transfer funds among ESSA programs with some restrictions. So first of all, you need to determine, is the LEA using federal transferability for 2021? Have you determined that you are transferring or have transferred funds among programs? You need to know which programs were subject to those transfers, which programs had funds transferred out, which programs had funds transferred in. School staff should also be aware of how this impacts program funds. If funds were transferred into a program, that increases the amount available for services in that program, and staff, be it school site or district staff who are responsible for that, need to know about that transferred money in so they know they have an increased amount to spend. Note that funds may be transferred out of Title II and Title IV, but they can be transferred into any of the title programs, Title I, II, III, or IV, but no funds can be transferred out of Title I or Title III. And we always remind people that you're transferring funds from a less restrictive to a more restrictive program generally, because Title I and Title III have more restrictions than Title II and IV. So just keep that in mind when you're transferring. All the funds that are transferred, the requirements of the program you transfer them into apply to those funds. So you need to determine who the amounts transferred. You should know what funds have been transferred. You should know how they're being used, who's tracking those funds, and who can provide you with the reporting on the expenditures for those funds. So that's task number one. All right. So next, Title I, there's a significant amount of reporting in Title I in the winter submission. And first of all, are the required and authorized reservations. There are two types of reservations, and both are reported in the winter consolidated application. There are required reservations and allowable, or what are referred to as authorized reservations. Authorized reservations include administrative costs and other district level services. Required reservations are reservations that must be made depending on your particular LEA. For example, parent and family engagement activities, that applies to all LEAs. Service for homeless youth applies to all LEAs. Neglected and delinquent reservation applies if that's applicable, and that's generally for county offices only. Equitable services applies to school districts and doesn't apply to charter schools. Again, these are funds that must be reserved if it applies to your district, but funds may be reserved for other costs. And other district level services can be provided from reserved funds, but only for students in Title I schools. All right. So let's take a look at the first reservation, and that's for parent and family engagement. Parent and family engagement, this applies to all LEAs. At least 1% of the district entitlement must be reserved for parent and family engagement activities. More than 1% may be reserved, but at least a minimum of 1%. And of that, whoops, can we go to the next slide? There we go. Yeah, we'll pop that. So at least 90% of the funds that are reserved out of the 1% have to be allocated to school sites. If more than 1% was reserved, then you need to determine if those additional funds were reserved for district level activities or were they allocated to school sites, because you'll be reporting that in the CONAP. if the funds that are allocated for school sites should be identified in school plans, and that will also be reported in the CONAP. Parents of Title I students need to be included in decisions about just the use of funds that are reserved. So it's required that parents be involved in the decision making. So a question you need to ask is, how were parents involved for the use of funds for district level funds, and how were they involved at the school level in determining the use of parent engagement funds for school level activities? Funds should be spent to support activities related to the LEAs and the school parent engagement policies. Those parent engagement policies that you have describe what your district plan is relative to specific areas and particular requirements. And how do you know that's happening? How do you know, do schools know what their parent involvement policy is? And are the funds that are allocated to school sites supporting those activities? So what you need to report in the consolidated application this February is your total reservation. How much did you reserve? Was it 1%? Was it more than 1%? And then you'll have to show how much was allocated to each school for parent engagement activities. Okay, the next reservation is for homeless youth. LEAs are required to reserve funds for services to homeless youth, regardless of the student's school of attendance. So services can be, additional services might be provided for homeless youth at Title I funds, at Title I schools. However, if you have students who are homeless and attending non-Title I schools and need services, reserved funds can be used to serve those children at those schools. There's no specified amount in the law that has to be reserved. However, the amount has to be reasonable to meet the needs of homeless students in the district. And it can include the cost of your homeless liaison. So some suggestions, how do you determine? It could be based on a per pupil amount based on your number of homeless students. That's one possibility. It could be an amount that reflects what you spent in the prior year. That might be a way to look at what did we spend last year. Another way is to talk with your homeless liaison and other people knowledgeable about the needs of homeless youth and talk with them about what those needs are, get their input. You might find that there are needs that aren't being met that they might be able to identify, and that could impact your reservation. So what you need to know, how much did your LEA reserve for services to homeless youth? And you should have an idea of what the basis was for determining that, because if you're questioned on it, you would need to respond to that. If this question is not reasonable, then you need a response as to this is how we determine the need. Another thing that's important, we don't see it happening sometimes, is that the homeless liaison needs to be informed of how much is reserved. Those are funds that they should be able to access to support the needs of homeless students. And we find sometimes we hear from our homeless liaison at LACO that she talks with homeless liaisons in districts and they have no idea how much funding is available for those services. So really important to make sure your homeless liaison is in the loop relative to that reservation. All right, then there are other authorized reservations. Okay, so the first question is, did you reserve district level funds for any other authorized reservations? One common area is professional development. Sometimes the district wants to provide particular professional development at the district level for Title I schools. And there are other authorized activities. Sometimes TOSAs are brought on at the district level and they serve multiple schools. So that's another possibility. But you need to know, have you reserved funds? And a reminder, they're often referred to as district-wide reservations. Actually, that's not really accurate. They are only for services for Title I schools. So if you have non-Title I schools, your Title I reservation may not be used to services for those students. So if you develop a professional development program, it can only be for Title I schools. So you need to know how much has been reserved for authorized activities, if any, and what are those services? How are the needs determined for those services? And since this is a district reservation that impacts site allocations, schools should be informed of those decisions. So how is that communicated to schools? Because in other words, if you're pulling funds off the top for a district reservation, schools are getting less funding. So they should be a part of that, and that should be communicated to them. And then how are those expenditures being reported and being tracked? So, whoops, reservation. Oops. Okay, we often get questions about how districts can provide services, particularly Title I services, because Title I is a school level program. Title II, III, and IV are all operated from the district level. You can allocate funds to schools, but Title I is a school level program. But sometimes districts want to provide services to their Title I schools, and they ask how can we do that? And there are actually two ways you can do that. What we just talked about is the first way, and that's through a district reservation. That means that the funds for district provided services are taken off the top of your Title I entitlement, okay, before you allocate the funds out to schools. Again, those services are only for Title I schools, but you pull those funds off the top and serve the schools from the district level. The other option is what's frequently referred to as centralized services from site allocations. So when after the funds are allocated to schools, then schools might determine that they would like to have a service provided by the district office. Or they might find they don't have enough money to provide, maybe they'd like a TOSA, but they can't provide a full TOSA, but another school wants the same thing, so the district could provide a centralized service. If the centralized service is provided from funds allocated to school sites, then the school budgets need to reflect those funds, and the school site council must determine and approve those as centralized services. So generally, a district will put a line in it that indicate in the school plans, the school will put centralized services. It should support an activity based on the needs assessment for that school. It's a part of their school allocation, but they essentially approve sending that funding to the district to provide the service. So two different ways. Reservation doesn't require school site council approval. However, school sites should be informed and consulted regarding the reservations, but formal school site council approval is not required. It is required for a centralized service because that's coming from a school level allocation. Okay, so those are two different ways districts can provide Title I services to their schools from the district level. All right. So now we take a look at the school plan. CDE Fiscal Monitoring Office has indicated, I just mentioned that if you have a centralized service, obviously that comes from school funds, school site council approves it, it's part of your school plan. Recently, a CDE Fiscal Monitoring Office has indicated that they will review school plans for a description of services provided through district reservations. In addition, the reserve funds should be identified separately to make it clear that these aren't part of the funds allocated to the school. Okay? Because when you have a program review, the reviewers will look at your consolidated application and your school plan budgets and make sure they match. If reserve funds are included, that would change or inflate the budget. So you need to clearly identify these are additional funds from the reservations. But CDE has made it clear that schools should have an understanding of the services provided by the district so they can make informed decisions about the best use of their Title I funds. And because these funds have to be provided to Title I schools, they would expect to see them reflected in school plans. So that's something new for some districts have been doing that all along. Another comment about the school allocations, okay? You'll be reporting school allocations in the consolidated application for Title I. Now, sometimes districts think this is when you start allocating funds to schools. That's not the case. LEAs need to determine eligibility and funding amounts for Title I schools at the beginning of the year. And there are specific ways that needs to be done. They're called ranking and serving procedures, and CDE website has a page devoted to that that takes you through the steps. Individual school allocations are then documented in the WinterCon app. So that's not when you do them, that's when they're documented. The school allocation page also includes your 1920 carryover. So any carryover that's allocated to individual school sites will be included. And it also includes a reporting of the amount for parent engagement, of the parent engagement reservation that's allocated to each site. Okay? So schools have to be identified, again, using specific legally mandated criteria. And the school allocation page includes that amount plus any carryover and your parent engagement reservation amount. So after you've done that, then schools will need to be informed of any changes in funding amounts, because sometimes you provide them estimates at the beginning of the year based on what CDE is posted. And when you get your consolidated application, you'll find that the amount might be different, maybe slightly, maybe significantly. Those funds then that are allocated to the schools, if that's different from what you initially allocated, school site councils need to revise the school plans so the amount in the school plan matches what's in the CONAP school allocation. Okay? And if you receive an FPM, that's what they're going to look at. Do those amounts match? Okay? And if the changes are material, and that means do they significantly impact the budget or the program, then the local board has to go back and approve the plans. So school site councils need to approve them. So thing to keep in mind, what school site council dates for meeting dates, make sure you have those in line for the January, February timeline, so you can have any revisions done, particularly if you're scheduled for an FPM report. Those of you who get FPMs in January, February, early in the year, that's particularly important to make sure that's done in a timely manner to avoid a finding. All right, let's look at another reporting is Title I carryover. Okay, and Title I, as you know, has a 15% carryover limit. However, for 1920, the SF Federal Flexibility Waiver allowed CDE to waive that requirement more than once every 3 years. Typically, you can only get a waiver once every 3 years. So now you can request a waiver more than once every 3 years for 1920 funds only. That request is done through the Winter Consolidated Application. In the past, this has included a requirement that you provide a brief description of how the LEA intends to use the funds in the current year. We don't know if that will still be there, but we anticipate that it'll still be there. And keep in mind, all 1920 funds have to be expended by September 30th, 2021. So if you carried funds over last year, if you exceeded the 15%, you need to watch that money and make sure that you spend it by September 30th, 2021. Okay? It's not anticipated that the carryover will be waived for 2021 funds. We've not heard anything about the possibility of a waiver of this year's funds. So if you carried over a lot last year, you need to watch for next year and see how much you're carrying over again, because we don't expect there'll be another waiver. However, it's anticipated, and I'll have to say this is rumor only, that CDE is going to reset the timelines for the once every 3 year waiver. So it will start, the timing will start all over again this year, but we've got to wait and see and get confirmation on that. All right, another area, and we're not quite sure that that's going to change a bit, equitable services. You're reporting on your equitable services reservation in the winter submission. This isn't new, but what is new is they moved your low income count for Title I out of the June CONAP reporting, and they moved it to the winter. The reason they did this was a lot of districts were saying things change, schools come in, they come out, numbers change, And it was difficult to report that in June because there were so many changes later in the year. So now you'll be reporting your low income count now, and the equitable services reservation will be calculated. So it's possible that you may need to go back and consult with your private schools if that changes the amount available for the equitable share. And finally, expenditure reports. So this is time to work closely with your fiscal office. You're going to have to report a few things. For 18, going back to 18-19, these are generally called closeout reports and that's for all Title I programs, because typically your 18-19 funds would have expired this past September 30th, 2020. However, the federal flexibility waiver extended the availability of those funds for another year. So you have until September 30th, 2021, but we anticipate there'll still be a reporting requirement on those funds and how much are expended. But again, they will expire. You've got an extra year on them, so any extra funds will be due to expire next September. Then there are also 19-20 18-month reports. So for last year's funds, you have to report again on your Title I carryover, but Title III requires reporting 18-month reports on your English learner and your immigrant funds. And sometimes in the past, they have also required 6-month reportings for current year expenditures. So what you can do now is find out who in your fiscal office is responsible for each of these program reports. Make sure they're prepared to complete the reports in the February submission. And then also you might want to make sure everyone gets signed up and you decide who's going to be reporting what for those reports. Okay. So start early, and those are some things you can do now to get ready for the reporting and hopefully be on the watch for it January 15th. And now I think I'm turning it over to Evan.
Thanks, Bonnie. Good morning, everyone. And I'm going to start off just by providing a brief recap of a workshop that we provided last week in conjunction with our Business Advisory Services unit. To update LEAs on the template requirements and the submission process for the budget overview for parents. And as you may recall, the budget overview for parents was first launched in conjunction with the 2019-20 LCAP. And the intent of the budget overview for parents was to provide parents with a brief and understandable snapshot of LEA expenditures, in particular the expenditures for high needs students, our English learners, foster youth, and low income students. So next slide, please. So the important role of the budget overview, or the BOP as we call it, becomes apparent when you consider that the BOP managed to survive both an executive order and the Senate Bill 98, which decoupled it from the LCAP. In fact, Senate Bill 98, which added the requirement for the 2020-21 Learning Continuity and Attendance Plan in place of the LCAP, actually changed the adoption deadline for the budget overview for parents to December 15th to align with the submission deadline for this interim budget report. So subsequently, the CDE has recommended that LEAs present their 2021 budget overview for parents for adoption to their board at the same public meeting at which the first interim report is approved by the governing board. The interim report and the BOP should be submitted as two separate items given their complexity, but there's no particular order recommended. We will be sending out a sample board item in our Q&A. We hadn't quite finished the formatting, but look for that. We'll be sending that out with the Q&A. In a September webinar, by the way, the CDE noted that because Learning Continuity Plan and the prior LCAP both had required separate public hearings and a robust stakeholder engagement process, the CDE was of the opinion that LEAs are not required to hold a separate public hearing. So there is no need for a separate public hearing. It's not against the rules, but you don't have to have a separate public hearing for it. And finally, following board approval and for districts county approval, LEAs must post their approved budget overview along with their learning continuity plans and their LCAP federal addendums in a prominent place on their webpage. Next slide, please. So on this slide, you'll see a screenshot of the data input tab from the budget overview for parents. And this is our business advisory services team actually annotated this to help LEAs in filling it out, and I've uploaded a copy of this annotated guide to our resource page, to our state and federal programs meeting for today. And it's expected that the sources cited in this annotation should be very familiar to your fiscal staff. In case they don't look familiar to you, things like the Form 01 may look pretty arcane, but this is really designed primarily for the fiscal staff to help them fill it out. So in addition to decoupling the budget overview from the LCAP, SB 98 required that the CDE update the template budget overview. And for those of you who completed this last year, you'll recognize the general layout of the data input tab, with the topmost section as your contact information, the goldenrod section reflecting current year revenues, salmon section reflecting current year budget expenditures, and the green section reflects prior year expenditures on high need students in the 2019-20 LCAP. However, there are some key updates I'd like to point out here. The 2021 revenue section now includes an additional input field to identify Federal CARES Act funding. And importantly, the Federal CARES Act funding sources that should be included in the budget overview for parents only refer to the ESSER, GEAR, and coronavirus relief funds. There's also some state funding, if you recall, and the learning loss mitigation funds. That's not to be included here. Next, you'll note that in the 2021 budget expenditure section, the template has been updated to reflect expenditures that were planned in the learning continuity plan rather than the LCAP, and that has some consequences for the narratives, which we'll talk about on the next slide. And then finally, the expenditures for high need students, the green section was updated to reflect the actual expenditures for high need students from 1920 rather than the estimated actuals as was required previously. And this is a result of this later submission date. Next slide, please. So the changes I just articulated on the previous slide are accompanied by changes to the narrative response tab. These changes are possibly more significant, and since frequently it's the program folks who are completing these narrative responses in the budget overview, we'd like to remind any of you who may end up working on this section that it's critically important to keep open lines of communication with your fiscal staff, because there'll be a lot of back and forth needed during this filling this out. So prompt 1, this is for all LEAs, and they're asked to describe any of the general fund expenditures that were not included in the learning continuity plan. Now this response will vary, but remember the learning continuity plan had no requirement to include all LCFF funds, as the actions and expenditures were aligned to the LCP prompts in response to COVID. So there may be a lot of general fund expenditures that aren't included in your learning continuity plan. So this prompt will be asking for a brief overview of general operating expenditures, basic services, and other things. So there may be a lot to include here if you only included your learning loss mitigation funds and some supplemental concentration grant funding, for example. Prompt 2 is a narrative that will be required if your budgeted expenditures for high need students that were in the learning continuity plan are less than your projected LCFF supplemental and concentration grant revenues. And in this narrative, LEAs are asked to describe the additional actions the LEA is taking to meet the LCFF increase or improve services requirement. Now you'll remember, if you worked on the learning continuity plan, that the second prompt in the learning continuity plan's increase or improve services section actually already asked LEAs to describe any actions that were not in plan that are meeting increased or improved services. So your narrative here should be consistent with what was described in the learning continuity plan. And just so you know, there's this response includes a preface. It automatically populates in the template section that says the additional improved services described in the plan include the following. So you want to write your narrative to be consistent with that. Finally, prompt 3 relates to the actual expenditures for high need students in the 2019-20 LCAP. And this narrative will be required if the actual expenditures for high need students in the LCAP is less than the total budgeted expenditures, which, given the disruption caused by COVID and school closure last spring, it's very likely that LEAs were unable to spend some S&C funds. So in this narrative, LEAs should describe the impact that they think this underspending had on the district's ability to increase or improve services to students. And while it's reasonable to briefly explain where the shortage came from, it's really important to focus on the effect that this had on providing support for students. That's the intent of this prompt. And again, note that the response has a template preface that reads, the difference between the budget and actual expenditures had the following impact on the LEA's ability to increase or improve services. So just know as you're writing that. Next slide, please. So what we're asking this year, just based on our prior year's experience, for LEAs to upload the PDF. So it comes in a spreadsheet. The template is a spreadsheet, and I've got a link that I'll share later if you haven't already downloaded it. But what we're asking, this is specific to the districts who'll be submitting, is to upload actually the data input table, the narrative response tab, as well as the template tab, all together in one PDF. So in the end, you'll only need to post the template page, but in order to completely evaluate for our purposes, it'll be helpful to have all three of those tabs included. And then when you do finally get approval, the only thing you need to post. So if you're a charter, you get it approved. The only thing you need to submit to us and post is that template page, but for districts, we're asking all three of those. And note also that our submission process for the budget overview will be made through the LCAP system, which has been updated to reflect. We have a new link for that, and it's very similar to what was required for the learning continuity plan, the written report to the community, and the CSI prompts if you're lucky enough to get those. So just look there. The interim report actually will be sent separately to whoever your contact in our BAS services is. So only the budget overview will be uploaded through the LCAP. Next slide, please. So in terms of districts, the review that we'll be undertaking at the county office, which includes both our unit and our business advisory services, will basically entail looking to ensure that the accuracy of the amounts entered in the data input tab, including the revenues, budgeted expenditures that are in the learning continuity plan, and the prior year planned expenditures for high need students are all correct. And then we'll want to see that the narrative responses adequately address the budget overview instructions. And just so we had a lot of back and forth, and there is an option for districts to resubmit a learning continuity plan that had been revised based on recommendations for amendment. If you haven't already, make sure you upload the most recent copy of your learning continuity plan, because that's what we'll be looking at, and that's what our BAS folks will be looking at to ensure alignment of what's in the BOP and what's in the learning continuity plan. Next slide, please. So we do have a few resources. If you weren't able to join us last week and you'd like some more information, we actually have uploaded the presentation slides as well as the recording from last week's budget overview for parents webinar. And in addition, there are links here for what's available on the CD website, which includes the budget overview for parents, the instructions for completing that, which we recommend downloading separately and using while you're filling that out, as well as a CDE webinar that was recorded. Next slide, please. So, that was it for the budget overview, and I wanted to update everyone on the free and reduced price meal collection. This is for the unduplicated pupil count for LCF. We spoke about it at our last meeting, and there have actually been some updates to it. And this is the CalPADS related thing. We had a lot of questions that came related to things with C schools, provision 2 and 3 schools. So we have an update on, as well as an update on the schools that are collecting counts for the PMs. Next slide, please. So just to briefly review, this year, although LEAs are being held harmless in the calculation of their average daily attendance, the calculation for the LCFF supplemental concentration grant, as well as the calculation then for the LEA's proportionality for increased or improved services, is based on the number of unduplicated pupils who were enrolled as of Census Day, which was October 7th, who met one of the criteria listed here. So they were eligible for free or reduced price meals based on either a free reduced price meal application or an alternative household income form. They're an EL, a foster youth, a homeless student, a migrant student, or they were directly certified for through a number of programs. The LEAs may choose to focus additional collection of their free and reduced price meal applications or well, in this most likely alternative household income forms on those students who are not meeting one of these UPC criteria to help narrow it. So in order to identify any students who are currently not counting towards your LEA's unduplicated count, we would recommend comparing the CalPADS Fall 1 Report 1.2 with the Report 1.18. Report 1.2 will reflect all students who are enrolled in your LEA on Census Day, and then Report 1.18 will reflect all students enrolled on Census Day that are part of your LEA's unduplicated count. So comparing these two reports will allow you to identify which students are not currently counting as part of the unduplicated count, so you can target them for verification of free and reduced price meal eligibility. Next slide, please. So this is a very important change. So as noted on the last slide, the students who are free reduced price meal eligible based on that application are included in the unduplicated count. However, prior to the USDA announcing that the summer meal program waiver extension was being provided through June 30th of 2021, the CDE had communicated to LEAs that those school sites opting to operate under the waiver could continue to solicit the free and reduced price meal applications for LCFF funding purposes, and they were anticipating that the waiver would expire on January 1st. However, with the waiver now extended for the entire school year, all school sites within the LEA operating the summer meal programs need to transition to collecting alternative household income forms to determine eligibility for unduplicated count. So if applications were distributed prior to October 9th, and those are then received by December 31st, those are still valid, but LEAs and LEAs don't need to collect any alternative household income forms for those families, but LEAs should no longer be positioning or sending out those soliciting the completion of the free and reduced price meal forms. That's actually not allowed under the waiver. So only the alternative income form should be sent out at this point. Next slide, please. So we did have some questions about schools operating under CEP. CEP stands for the Community Eligibility Provision. It's a provision that allows eligible schools to offer meal service to all students at no charge for free lunch or breakfast meals. It's predominantly for LEAs that serve low-income children, and it's instead of traditional paper applications, the CEP uses information from other programs, direct certifications such as SNAP and TANF. So schools participating under the CEP are actually already prohibited from collecting the free and reduced price meal applications, and students are directly certified through a state or local match that determines their eligibility. And since CEP schools are prohibited from collecting the applications already, California Ed Code authorizes the collection of alternative household income for LCFF purposes. So that's been an ongoing process. The question arises, though, what to do in this year. So the need to collect alternative household income forms primarily is going to impact any schools under CEP that either did not opt to establish a base year and collect, or they collect forms annually, and those schools who are just now establishing an LCFF base year in 2021. So the CDE recognizes that schools may find it difficult to collect forms from families this year. However, the CDE does not have the authority to exempt schools. So this is a statutory requirement. So they did provide more time via the deadline extension to receive forms in order to be included in the unduplicated pupil count. So that was extended, as we've discussed before, from October 31st to December 31st. And LEAs can distribute and collect alternative household income forms online, and electronic signatures are now acceptable. In addition, for the 2021 year only, LEAs may also complete alternative household income forms on behalf of a student's household by collecting information over the telephone. And they must provide LEA documents, the date, the time, and the name of the student's adult household member who is spoken to, as well as the signature of the LEA staff member collecting that information. And all of these details are included on a document that I've uploaded to our site that kind of goes into the details. Next slide, please. So the other schools, any schools operating under Provision 2 or Provision 3, this similar to CEP, these schools receive reimbursement for meals served based on participation in a base year. these schools actually do collect the National School Lunch Program applications during that base year. However, for this year, the USDA issued some guidance on November 2nd to state agencies regarding establishing base years. And in that guidance, they indicated that LEAs that operate Provision 2 or 3 and had established a separate LCFF base year that needs to be reestablished this year. So if they've been operating and this happened to be the year to reestablish their base, they can collect alternative income information forms. So if you're if you have schools that are Provision 2 or 3, and this was their base year, you can use the alternative income forms to establish your unduplicated pupil count for LCFF. And like CEP, the deadline was extended to December 31st to collect that. And next slide. Final slide. This is just a brief summary of what I just discussed, and I've included, like I said, in the resources an attachment that went out to your school nutrition folks. And just summarize, LEAs that offer summer meals programs are not allowed to collect FRPM applications, except those that were distributed prior to October 9th. And so instead they should use those alternative household income forms. If LEAs are not using the summer meals waiver and are continuing with the National School Lunch Program as is, they then must use the free and reduced price meal application. And then CEP schools and Provision 2-3 schools are now allowed to collect alternative household income forms if this is their base year, or if they have always collected annually, so they have until the December 31st of 2020 to collect those. And the alternative household income form prototypes are available at the link that I've included here. And that was a lot. And so I'm passing the baton now to Jeannie to talk about annual update revisions.
Thank you, Evan. Good morning, everyone. And yes, Evan, that was a lot of information, and everyone just take a moment to catch your breath before we switch to this next section. So with that brief moment, today I'm going to provide an update on the process in place to revise the annual update section to be included in the 2020-21-22 LCAP that LEAs will be preparing to submit by June 30th. Next slide, please. So as you know, specific legislation in response to the context created by the pandemic created the requirement for revisions to the annual update. SB 98 removed the requirement for LEAs to adopt an LCAP for the 2021 school year. In place of the LCAP, SB 98 required LEAs to adopt a learning continuity plan for LEAs to address how their LEA would continue learning during school closures and address the learning loss in response to the conditions created by the COVID crisis. Additionally, SB 820 requires LEAs to complete an annual update for the 2019-20 LCAP and the 2020-21 Learning Continuity Plan, where LEAs would report out on what occurred related to each of these plans and report the related expenditures. These new requirements necessitate revisions to the LCAP template for the 2021-22 LCAP, which LEAs will be developing for approval coming this June. And statute requires the Superintendent of Public Instruction, in consultation with the Executive Director for the State Board, to make revisions to the LCAP template by January 31st. So next slide, please. With this context in mind, the CDE has begun the planning process for the revisions to the LCAP annual update template by sharing an initial draft for stakeholder feedback. In October, the CDE presented the draft during a Tuesdays at 2 webinar and posted their draft for stakeholder feedback. The link to that draft is included on the slide. And multiple stakeholders tuned into the presentation of the initial draft template and provided input via the chat room, and others submitted additional feedback following the presentation to the LCFF office. Next slide, please. This initial approach of the CDE combined the 2019-20 annual update template that had been adopted by the SBE in January of the prior year, 2020, for the new LCAP template planned for initial use this year, with an initial draft of an annual update for the learning continuity plan. And CDE asked for input from stakeholders and posed some questions. They asked, from your vantage point within the education system, what makes sense to include? What makes sense to remove? And they asked, how can we balance the needs of LEAs and the needs of stakeholders? So during the Tuesdays at 2 October webinar, multiple concerns and challenges were shared, including how to best collect data in the absence of state collected data through CalPads and the dashboard, and how the annual update process could be helpful to inform future planning as LEAs develop their next LCAP. Many of the participants in the webinar were from LEAs and county offices. So next slide, please. Let's take a look at the draft that was presented during this October webinar to see what was shared and to what people provided feedback. So in this screenshot, we see for the annual update for the 1920 LCAP. In the first draft, this requires a review of the goals, actions, and expenditures included in the 1920 LCAP, and a response to provide an analysis of the overall implementation and effectiveness of actions and services to achieve each of the goals in the LCAP, an explanation of material differences between budgeted and actual expenditures in each goal, and then reflecting on the progress of the goal and an analysis of the data in the California School Dashboard, LEAs would need to describe the relationship of each goal and related metrics and actions with the development of the new goals in the 2021-24 LCAP. Next slide, please. The first draft of the annual update would also connect to this year's learning continuity plan. And here we can see how it would connect to each of the sections in the learning continuity plan and the format for reporting out estimated actual expenditures for planned actions included in the learning continuity plan sections and an analysis for each section. This screenshot addresses the in-person instructional offerings section. Here you can see the analysis section requires descriptions to address successes and challenges experienced in implementing in-person instruction in the 2021 school year, a description of substantive differences in planned actions and actual implementation of actions, an explanation of material differences between budgeted and estimated actual expenditures, and an explanation of how lessons learned from implementing in-person instruction have informed the development of goals and actions in the 2021-24 LCAP. On the next slide, we can see how the first draft replicated this same format for the distance learning program section, which is the second section in the learning continuity plan. Reporting of estimated actuals applies to actions addressing distance learning. Analysis requires the LEA to describe implementation, effectiveness, material differences, and explain how lessons learned from distance learning have informed the development of the goals and actions in the 21 to 24 LCAP. And on the next slide, we can see the same format is applied to the pupil learning loss section. And then on the next slide, we see the final section of the learning continuity plan in the annual update format. And this additional section applies to the additional actions section from the learning continuity plan. And in the additional actions section of the learning continuity plan, LEAs may have included actions related to mental health and social and emotional well-being, pupil and family engagement and outreach, and providing school nutrition in the 2021 school year. The draft requires that these categories would be addressed and analyzed in this section. So the screenshots I've shared with you show what was proposed in the first draft. And I shared a little bit about some of the comments and the process for input during the webinar. On the next slide, we can see that during the template revision process, CDE also provided the opportunity for stakeholders to submit comments and recommendations via email, and that the state superintendent and executive director of the state board may also have received feedback. Here we can see that a communication from the LCFF Equity Coalition on the draft template. And as you may know, this group is composed of civil rights, advocacy, community, parent and student organizations that have worked on the passage and implementation of the local control funding formula and the accompanying accountability systems. Their comments and recommendations address the format for the instructions in the annual update for the 1920 LCAP, the format and instructions for the annual update for the 2021 Learning Continuity Plan, as well as recommendations regarding instructions related to measuring and reporting goals in the new LCAP template. And their comments and recommendations seek to increase transparency and accountability for focusing resources and outcomes to help California's neediest students. Let's go to the next slide. So the feedback process is now in the phase of creating a second draft. And CDE is continuing the process they began for planning the revisions and seeking input to inform the revisions to the LCAP and Learning Continuity Plan annual update template. On December 15th, CDE will present a second draft during a Tuesday at 2 webinar. Input provided during the webinar and following will further inform the CDE to address their question about how can we or they balance the needs of LEAs and the needs of stakeholders in reporting out what occurred through the annual update and the learning continuity plan. We can anticipate that CDE may also provide an information memorandum that provides additional information. And we know that the statute requires any revisions to the LCAP template to be completed by January 31st. so we can anticipate additional communication. As always, it will be important to review and provide input on the second draft that is going to be presented in December so that we can support the CDE to develop meaningful revision to the requirement to provide an annual update in the new LCAP template. And with that, I'm going to turn it over now to Amy, who's going to give us an update on some CARES Act funds.
Thank you, Jeannie. And yes, I do want to acknowledge that it is 11:30. That was the anticipated end date of this Zoom meeting. If you do end up having to leave us, we are recording this and it will be posted to our LACO SFP website, so it'll be made available to you all. I'll go ahead and move forward with the last topic of today's meeting, and we want to take a look at the CARES Act and with a specific focus on the coronavirus relief funds. Next slide. We shared this graphic at our last meeting, and it's just a way to look at how the relationships between the various sub-funds that are allocated to LEAs contained within the CARES Act. And so just as a reminder, the coronavirus relief funds were specifically packaged as part of the learning loss mitigation funds. Next slide. This is a chart that summarizes the timelines. And so the coronavirus relief funds, as I'm sure you are all aware, had the most aggressive timeline with an expenditure deadline of December 30th, 2020. Next slide. The Learning Loss Mitigation Funds has 10 specific reporting categories, and as such, it does contains all three sub-funds, the GEAR, the General Fund, as well as the CRF. And so as LEAs were planning, these were the categories in which expenditures will need to be recorded and which they will need to fit. The next slide provides some examples. These are just some rough examples of charges that might fit into these different reporting categories. And it's likely that our audience today probably has the best examples to give, but these are just some quick examples that might offer some help. Next slide. Again, the state did provide, there was some CRF guidance that was provided from states from the Treasury. And just as a reminder, the funds were not intended to be used to cover shortfalls in revenues. And so while the default was to try to spend these new funds on new items as a result of the COVID emergency, and there's certainly a need for new expenditures and new purchases, LEAs are being asked to be careful when considering whether or not current expenditures that were budgeted could be allocated through the CRF funds. And so there is a rule that talks about how payments could only be used to cover costs that were not accounted for in the budget that was most recently approved by the LEA as of March 27, 2020. But the guidance did clarify that a cost could be charged to CRF if it cannot be lawfully funded using a line item allotment or allocation within that budget, or if the cost was substantially different, of substantially different use from any expected use of funds in a line item allotment or allocation. And so that guidance is, there's a link to that guidance at the bottom of the slide. Next slide. With the deadline for expenditures in CRF approaching, we shared some of this information at our last meeting as well, but we thought it'd be good to include again as a reference. There were many questions about the deadline and whether it meant orders needed to be placed by December 30th or whether payment needed to be made by the December 30th deadline. So clarification from the Treasury and the CDE both state that LEAs needed to place orders with the reasonable expectation that those orders would be received by December 30th, but that if orders are received late due to delays or supply chain interruptions that were outside the control of the LEA may still use coronavirus relief funds. And it's still generally expected that payment take place within 90 days of a cost being incurred. And there's quite a number of other examples in terms of bulk purchases and other types of purchases that might have some of these types of exceptions that are contained within the CRF guidance and FAQ. So those would be helpful resources for districts. Take a look at the next slide. These are the CARES Act reporting windows, and the CDE had opened a supplementary reporting window, which was initially unexpected. So that window was open for just a short period, about a week, from November 10th through yesterday, November 18th. The CDE had provided districts an opportunity to revise their expenditure reporting from that first reporting period, and also include any projected expenditures that were anticipated through December 30th, 2020. On the next slide, the reason for that supplementary reporting window, which did close yesterday, is because under federal law, the Department of Finance must return any coronavirus relief funds that are not spent by December 30th, 2020. And so the department has the authority to recapture unexpended coronavirus relief funds from LEAs to reallocate them to other pandemic-related priorities elsewhere in the state budget. So LEAs should be aware of this possibility, and dependent on the report that your LEA submitted by yesterday's deadline, we haven't heard definitively whether the department plans to recapture any funds that were reported as projected to be unexpended, but this is definitely has been kind of stated in different circles that it is a possibility. Next slide. So looking again at the coronavirus relief fund, that there is that spending restriction that expenditures cannot have been in the LEA's budget as of March 27th. And that exception, the only exception is that if the cost had been repurposed for a substantially different use. So essentially all the expenditures being charged to CRF are either new expenditures incurred as a result of COVID, or their previously budgeted expenditures, most likely staffing costs for employees whose duties that have been changed to meet the definition of substantially different use in response to COVID. Take a look at some of those examples on the next slide. There are some examples of here for repurposed staff. And here you see those in three categories. So first we have the protected staff, which are positions that were protected from layoffs by Senate Bill 98. These might be staff from transportation division, nutrition services, or custodial services who may have been repurposed, though they may have salaries charged to the CRF. There are other examples here on the slide, such as those for support staff at the site level, whose duties may look significantly different due to school closures and in support of distance learning, as well as central office staff. So these are some examples that have been provided that may just help to kind of shape the idea behind the meaning of repurposed staff. Next slide. So it is possible that as your LEA's needs have evolved over the course of these past months with school closures and this pandemic, and with increasing clarity around the guidance for CARES Act funds, LEAs may have needed to make some adjustments to initial plans in terms of implementation of your plan, as well as related expenses. So one key takeaway we want to share from this all is to emphasize the importance of state and federal programs administrators and business office administrators remaining in close communication and collaborating around the implications of these changes and the impact that they might have on categorical funding or planning processes. In your LEA, have there been any modifications to plans around funding sources? So where you may have initially budgeted in one funding source, now due to the timelines and coronavirus relief funds needing to be spent by December 30th, perhaps there's been some changes in how you've looked at allocating those resources. So we need to think about those implications. So as examples, in terms of looking at LCFF, are there any actions or services that were initially planned as LCFF contributing actions in your learning continuity plan, which are now maybe being charged to CRF. How might that connect to what you would be reporting in the budget overview for parents in December, or the annual update to the LCAP that'll get completed later this year? So needing to know what those changes were and the implications to those types of planning processes. In terms of federal title dollars, for example, were there summer programs that might have initially been planned for out of Title I, or professional development that might have been initially slated for something like Title II? And then let's say if the focus of that programming or PD changed, could those have been then charged to coronavirus relief funds? And what might that mean in terms of planning for those federal dollars, which were then freed up? So taking a look at what that might mean on the next slide. Changes like that might have implications on your planning for the second half of the year, or planning for carryover into the next year. Will the district need to then adjust plans for funds that were previously obligated and now charged to that different budget? Will that change plan implementation? Would there be any impact with this unintended carryover, and how that might impact planning for next year perhaps? If the influx of CARES funds impacted school level budgets, or if the LEA was looking at charging allowable school level expenditures to CRF, what considerations would need to be made in that case? Just be thinking about the guidance that you might need to provide to schools in working with school site councils, or the impact that might have on school plans and plan modifications. Again, these considerations might not apply to your LEA depending on how CRF was expended or planned for within your LEA. But we had heard that the additional funding was causing an impact on some districts' planning and expenditures in other budgets. And so if this is the case in your LEA, we thought it might be worth noting that state and federal program administrators will want to be aware of whether or not any actions taken by business office in terms of changes to initial budget plans might have an impact on the planning and budgeting processes related to categorical funding sources. And so again, this is really just another example of the close ties between state and federal programs offices and business offices within the district. Sometimes there's some unintended impacts that changes in one might have an impact in changes in the other. So just something to be aware of that we thought we would like to share. And on the last slide, what we have is some links to CARES Act CDE websites, as well as a CRF specific FAQ and guidance that is available for you. And on the next slide, again, as always, we appreciate all your great questions, and those that we have been not able to answer through our presentation or in the chat today. We will be compiling those and providing you a thoughtful response in writing, and that will be made available to our participants. And so we will leave the Zoom open for a little while longer for any additional questions, or as always, you can email sfp@laco.edu or any one of the coordinators or our project director, Bonnie McFarland, and we're always available here to support you. Thank you again for participating in our virtual state and federal programs Zoom today, and we hope you have a wonderful weekend, and happy Thanksgiving to you all next week.